In the early 1970s, on a wooded hillside in western Pennsylvania, archaeologists dug beneath a sandstone overhang where local teenagers used to drink. They kept going until they reached charcoal from an ancient fire. The lab dated it to near 16,000 years, thousands of years older than anyone was supposed to find in North America. Archaeologists have argued about it ever since. That rock shelter sits in the Appalachians. It is far from the strangest thing found in these mountains. That place makes this list. So do 12 others. A quarter-mile snake of earth laid along the rim of a meteorite crater. A boulder carved with 1,500 symbols no one has read. Stick with us to the end, because number 1 is the largest burial mound in the Hemisphere, and the small stone found inside it may be one of the most elaborate fakes in American history. If you like careful, source deep dives into forgotten places, subscribe. Today we are counting down 13 ancient sites in the Appalachian Mountains that scientists still can't fully explain. We start in Franklin, North Carolina, a small town in the Little Tennessee River Valley. There is a grassy mound here, smooth-sided and flat-topped, wedged between shop fronts on the business route of US 441. This is Nikwasi. For roughly 1,000 years, it was the spiritual and political center of a Cherokee town of the same name. A townhouse once stood on top, holding a fire that was never allowed to go out. It was already important enough to appear in Spanish expedition records in the 1560s. Here is the thing that sets it apart. It has never been formally excavated. Almost every other major mound in the region has been dug into. This one keeps its secrets. In Cherokee tradition, it is a home of the Nuneti, the immortals, the people who live anywhere. The story goes that when an enemy overwhelmed the town's defenders, warriors poured out of the side of the mound to fight. The moment they stepped outside the town, they became invisible. The enemy felt the arrows and the tomahawks. They never saw a single attacker. In 1946, local school children pooled their pennies to help buy the mound and save it. In early 2026, after more than 200 years, it was returned to the care of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. It is a sacred site that outlasted everyone who tried to own it. Number 12 is a 2,000-year-old tomb sitting in the middle of a city park. In South Charleston, West Virginia, the Criel Mound rises about 35 feet out of a manicured lawn, ringed by streets. The Adena built it between roughly 250 and 150 BC. It is the second largest burial mound in the state, behind one you will meet at the end of this list. For a while, nobody treated it that way. In 1840, someone built a judge's stand on top of it. Later, there was a bandstand, a sacred mound used as civic furniture, when the Smithsonian tunneled into it in 1883. They reached the base and found a log tomb. Inside were 11 people. One large skeleton lay in the center, and 10 others radiated out from it, like the spokes of a wheel. The man who led that dig, Colonel P.W. Norris, had an unusual arsum. Before the Smithsonian, he had been the second superintendent of Yellowstone. 2,000 years of the dead below, and for a century the town held its concerts on the roof. Number 11 is a rock with a very confident sign next to it. In Manchester, Kentucky, under a small shelter in a city park, sits a 50-ton sandstone slab covered in carvings. The official sign beside it claims those carvings include at least 8 extinct Old World alphabets, Greek, Hebrew, Ogham, runes, and more, left by explorers who supposedly crossed the ocean long before Columbus. The sign is wrong. The carvings are real. They are Native American, pre-contact, pecked into the stone in a style found across the region. The Old World reading came from a local enthusiast in the late 20th century, working from the writings of Barry Fell, an author popular with the public in the 1970s and rejected by professional archaeologists for not meeting basic standards. When the slab fell onto Highway 66 in 1994, that belief was strong enough that the community craned it onto a flatbed, hauled it 20 miles into town, and set it up with the fringe translation printed on a plaque. Archaeologists from Kentucky and Tennessee say the marks bear little resemblance to the alphabets they supposedly represent. There is a pattern underneath it. The instinct to credit indigenous carvings to imagined visitors from somewhere else shows up again and again in these mountains. Watch for it. It is a debunked theory protected by a metal roof on the National Register. Number 10 became famous because of a television show. Track Rock Gap sits in the Chattahoochee National Forest in North Georgia, near the state's highest peak. 6 soapstone boulders there hold more than 100 carvings, feet, animal tracks, circles, shapes. The Forest Service and Georgia archaeologists are clear about who made them, Creek and Cherokee people, beginning more than 1,000 years ago and continuing into the 1800s. Then, in 2011, a writer proposed that the nearby stone terraces were built by Maya refugees who fled Central America and settled in the Georgia mountains. A cable series ran with it in 2012. The idea spread fast. It did not survive contact with the evidence. Test excavations dated the terraces and pottery to local cultures, with radiocarbon readings around the year 1018. The Muskogee Creek Nation and the Eastern Band of Cherokee publicly rejected the Maya story in their own words, but the damage was already moving. The attention brought crowds, and then it brought vandals. Around 2021, 5 of the boulders were scratched, and 2 were painted over. Carvings that had lasted 1,000 years were defaced in an afternoon. A myth about a lost city nearly destroyed the real thing it was invented around. Number 9 is a fort that was never a fort. On the Highland Rim in Tennessee, where 2 forks of the Duck River split around a plateau, ancient walls of earth and stone run for about 1.25 miles. They enclose 50 acres. When European settlers found them, they assumed the only reason to wall off a hilltop was defense, and they named it the Old Stone Fort. The name is wrong. The walls are too low to stop anyone. There is no water source inside, and no sign anyone ever lived there. It was built between roughly 80 and 550 AD by Middle Woodland people, and archaeologists now describe it as a vacant ceremonial center, a place people came to, but did not stay. And then there is the alignment. The 2 long mounds that form the entrance point within a single degree at the exact spot on the horizon where the sun rises on the summer solstice. By the time settlers arrived, the builders were gone, and no living memory explained it. Everything we know from the ground. They did not build a fort. They built a doorway for the sun and aimed it at one morning a year. Number 8 is a meal. In a salt-rich valley in southwestern Virginia, archaeologists believe someone killed a mastodon, butchered it, and cooked it, roughly 14,000 years ago. The evidence is specific. Cut marks on the bones. Congealed grease that could only come from cooking. Heat cracked stones from a fire. Simple stone tools, including a blade made from rock carried in from somewhere else. The reason that matters is a number in a textbook. For most of the 20th century, the story was that the first Americans, the Clovis people, arrived around 13,000 years ago. Saltville is older than that, so it belongs to a small group of sites alongside others on this list. That suggests people were here earlier than anyone taught. The valley itself did the preserving. Salt springs drew mammoths, ground sloths, musk oxen, and caribou down out of the Ice Age, and a flat layer of mud sealed their bones in place. Interest here runs deep. In 1782, a mastodon tooth from this valley was mailed to Thomas Jefferson. The who was never the mystery. It was people. The argument is about the when, and it is not settled. Somebody sat here and ate before anything we would call history had begun. Number 7 is about the size of a bar of soap. In 1889, a Smithsonian excavation opened an undisturbed burial mound in Loudoun County, Tennessee, and pulled out a small inscribed stone. The man in charge first read the marks as Cherokee. Then, in the 1970s, a scholar of ancient languages looked at the stone the other way up and announced something far stranger, that the letters were Paleo-Hebrew, 1st or 2nd century, evidence that people from the ancient Mediterranean had reached Tennessee 2,000 years ago. It made headlines. Judean refugees in Appalachia. And because the Smithsonian's own agent had dug it out of a sealed mound, defenders argued it could not be a modern plant. Then, someone found the source. The ancient letters line up closely with an illustration printed in an 1870 Masonic handbook, a 19th century reference book, hiding inside a supposedly 2,000-year-old artifact. The consensus now is that it is a forgery, though a few still argue otherwise. The mound was real. The burial was real. The people were real. The tablet is the one thing in the box that lied. We opened this video with that rock shelter in Pennsylvania, the one with the 16,000-year-old fire. Let us know in the comments whether that date surprised you, or whether you think the critics have a point. If you are enjoying the deep dive, a thumbs up genuinely helps more people find these stories. The second half is where the mounds get bigger and the stakes get higher. Number 6 runs along the top of a Georgia mountain. On the summit of Fort Mountain in the Blue Ridge, a wall of stacked stone zigzags for somewhere between 855 and 928 feet, depending on who measured it. No mortar holds it together. It stands 2 to 7 feet high, dotted with pits, with the ruin of a gateway at one point. It has been studied for generations, and the exact builders and purpose remain loosely pinned down, most likely woodland-era native people, most likely ceremonial, given that it is far too low to defend anything. That uncertainty left room for stories. Cherokee tradition says it was raised by the Moon-eyed people, a pale race said to see better in the dark, later driven off the mountain. Other tales credit Spanish treasure hunters or a lost Welsh prince and his colonists. Those last stories deserve a warning. The idea that some vanished European race built America's ancient structures is an old one, and it was used for a long time to take credit away from the native people who actually did the work. Enjoy the legend of the moon-eyed people. Just don't lose the builders inside it. The wall is still up there, running cliff to cliff, keeping its own counsel. Number 5 killed a man. In 1877, a crew led by a Harvard archaeologist named Lucian Carr was digging a shaft down through a mound in Lee County, Virginia. Near the bottom, the shaft collapsed. One worker was crushed and killed. Others were injured. And the dig that cost a life went on to settle one of the ugliest arguments in American archaeology. Here is the argument. For most of the 19th century, white writers refused to believe that Native Americans had built the Great Mounds. The earthworks were too organized, too impressive, so they invented a vanished civilized race to explain them: Welshmen, Norsemen, Phoenicians, the lost tribes of Israel, and cast native people as latecomers who merely found what someone else left behind. They called it the lost race theory. Carr's excavation at Ely Mound cut through it. He tied the mound directly to ancestral native builders, and he rejected the lost race idea outright. Alongside the Smithsonian's later mound survey, it became one of the moments that established a plain fact. The people who built the mounds were the ancestors of the people who were still there. The mound itself dates to somewhere between 1200 and 1650, a townhouse mound of the late Woodland and Mississippian period. It held burials, pottery, shell beads, and a polished stone disc used in a game called Chunky. After 1877, it sat mostly untouched until a university team returned in 2019 and confirmed the date all over again. This whole list keeps circling one question: who built these things? This is the mound where somebody answered it, and paid for the answer with a life. Number 4 is a single rock covered in writing that no one can read. In a pasture near Cullowhee, North Carolina, below the forested slopes of the southern Appalachians, sits a boulder of soft soapstone. Carved into its surface are roughly 1,500 separate figures, cupules, lines, shapes that suggest people and animals. It holds more carvings than any other known boulder east of the Mississippi. They were made over a very long time, from about the year 500 to around 1700, and they do not form a written language. That is the heart of it. We know who carved them, ancestral Cherokee and earlier peoples. We know roughly when. What is lost is the meaning of each mark, the intent behind the figures. The rock has a name and a story. It is called Judaculla, after Sulkalu, a giant in Cherokee tradition. The nearby town of Cullowhee takes its name from the same word, Judaculla's place. Tradition reads a set of 7 lines as the print of the giant's 7-fingered hand, and a long straight groove as the boundary of his hunting ground. Cross that line, the story warns, at your own risk. There is a slower loss underneath all of it. The stone is soft, and the weather is winning. The carvings are fading, year by year, which is why the Eastern Band of Cherokee and Western Carolina University now work to record and protect what remains. 1,500 messages left on a rock for 1,000 years, going quiet again just as we started to listen. Number 3 is best seen from the air. From above, a serpent uncoils across a ridge in southern Ohio for about a quarter of a mile, roughly 1,348 feet of raised earth. Its body winding through 7 curves, its open jaws reaching toward an oval that looks like an egg. It is the largest serpent effigy in the world, and it sits on strange ground. The ridge it follows lies inside a crater, a scar left when something struck the earth here in the deep past, one of only a handful of such structures in North America. The builders chose that spot and aimed the serpent's head at the point where the sun sets on the summer solstice. 2 things science cannot pin down: when it was built and by whom. When Harvard's Frederick Ward Putnam dug into it in the 1800s, he found no artifacts inside the serpent itself, nothing to date. In 1991, radiocarbon results pointed to around the year 1070, the Fort Ancient culture. Then, in 2014, new samples pointed back to around 300 BC and the Adena. 2 cultures, more than 1,000 years apart, both with acclaim. The likeliest answer is that both are right, that one people shaped it and another, centuries later, rebuilt and honored it. What it meant to either of them, a calendar, a symbol, a prayer written in earth, is still open. A quarter-mile snake on the rim of a crater, and we cannot agree which millennium it belongs to. Number 2 is the site we opened with, and it deserves the full story. Meadowcroft is a rock shelter, a sandstone overhang above a wooded ravine in southwestern Pennsylvania. Starting in 1973, a team led by archaeologist James Adavasio excavated it with unusual care, working down through more than 50 separate radiocarbon dates that lined up in clean, consistent order. The deepest layers came back around 14 to 16,000 years old. One fragment, what may be a piece of a woven basket or mat, dated to roughly 19,000 years. For decades, the rule was firm: no humans in the Americas before about 13,000 years ago, the Clovis people first. Meadowcroft broke that rule. And so it became one of the most argued over sites on the continent. The fight was narrow and specific. Critics did not doubt the digging, and they did not doubt that the oldest objects were made by human hands. They doubted the dates. Their theory was contamination, that ancient coal or groundwater in the sediment had thrown the carbon off and made the layers look older than they were. Adavasio's team argued the dates were clean. As other early sites turned up elsewhere, many of the loudest critics went quiet. Even the most cautious reading leaves Meadowcroft at 12,000 years, which still makes it one of the oldest known places people lived in North America. That braided fragment, if the date holds, comes from a continent humans were not supposed to have reached yet. People sheltered here, made a fire, and went to sleep, and left a question we are still trying to answer 16,000 years later. Number 1 begins in the middle of an ordinary town. You come around a corner in Moundsville, West Virginia, and there it is, a green hill, 62 feet high, rising straight out of the city blocks. Its sides are smooth and grassed, steep enough that a footpath spirals to the top, Around it, streets, houses, and the dark stone walls of an old penitentiary. Look up at it and it feels less like a landmark than a mountain that wandered into town and stayed. This is Grave Creek Mound, the largest conical burial mound in the Hemisphere. The Idina raised it about 2,000 years ago, between roughly 250 and 150 BC, in stages over the better part of a century. They moved close to 60,000 tons of earth to build it, carried, by most estimates, in millions of individual baskets, one load at a time. A wide moat once ringed it. Smaller mounds once surrounded it. The town that grew up here was named for what lay in the ground. When local diggers first tunneled in 1838, they reached 2 burial chambers with skeletons and grave goods, copper bracelets, shell beads, a carved ornament of mica. And they reported one more thing: a small inscribed stone. That stone is why this site is number 1. For nearly 2 centuries, people have argued about what is carved on it. Some read the marks as ancient Iberian script. Some read Punic. Others reached for Norse runes, and at least one suggested a message from off the earth entirely. Careers rose and fell on it. One Smithsonian official is said to have lost his post for defending it. Then, in 2008, a researcher traced the stone's ancient characters to an illustration in a book printed in 1782. Not 2,000 years old, barely 200. Most archaeologists now call it a hoax, a fake carved so carefully that people fought over it for 180 years. Here is where the mound and the stone say 2 different things. The stone is a story about someone who wanted the past to be stranger than it was. The mound is a story about a people who, with baskets and patience, built the largest earthwork of its kind on the continent, and were later told by strangers that they could not possibly have done it. The stone may be a lie. The mound has never been anything but the truth. It is still there, in the middle of town, 62 feet of proof that no one needed to invent. There are more of these than we could fit. Petroglyph boulders, drowned mounds, and hilltop enclosures scattered across these mountains that never made the cut. My own favorite is the old stone fort, because a doorway aimed at one sunrise a year tells you exactly how much these builders knew. Which one surprised you most, and which site did we miss? Subscribe, and we will keep walking through the places history left behind.